And this is the moment when a young officer named Burmin comes into our story. Burmin was a very attractive young man. He had just the type of intellect which women like, pliant and observant, utterly unpretentious, and gaily ironical. He seemed to be of a quiet and modest disposition, but rumor had it that he had once been a dreadful scapegrace. Hello and welcome back to the Rulet series, where we talk about classic yet a bit less known Russian literature in English translation. Today is the final part of my rambling about the snowstorm or the blizzard, Pushkin's short story from his Belkin series of 1830. If you haven't seen the previous episode, check it out. And so we stopped at the moment when, after a stormy night, Maria wakes up and joins her parents in the living room as if nothing has happened. Meanwhile, Vladimir, after being stranded by the snowstorm, finally arrives to the church and finds out something dreadful, but we do not know what has happened actually. Soon after, Maria becomes sick, speaking in her feverish dream about her love to Vladimir. How do her parents react, I wonder? Do they lock her up? Or do they threaten her with a parental curse? Well, no. She, Maria's mother, consulted her husband and some of her neighbors, and at last all agreed that evidently it was fated, that marriages were made in heaven, that poverty was no vice, that one had to live with a man and not with his money, and so on. Moral proverbs are wonderfully useful in cases when we have little to say in self-justification. Just a little footnote. In Russian, it sounds even better because all these proverbs are so banal and redundant that you can't help but laugh at the fact that these people actually choose these, fixed sayings instead of just talking about their feelings. Yes? So this is again another wonderful example of Pushkin's irony. And in a way it matches the story style and logic of people trying to emulate or even inscribe themselves into a logic of a fictional text. So what happens next? Vladimir, however, refuses to show up, goes to war, because the story is set in 1811-1812, during the Napoleon's invasion to Russian Empire. And so he eventually falls there. As David Bethea, the literary scholar, puts it, what has been promised by the low-key communes of the sentimental novel undergoes step-by-step frustration. Vladimir's plans for elopement and secret marriage ran amok. The cruel parents turn out to be kind, and virtue goes unrewarded. Instead of throwing himself at the feet of Maria Gavrilovna's parents, Vladimir falls in the war with Napoleon, and instead of committing suicide on hearing of her lover's death, Maria Gavrilovna faints away. But, heaven be thanked, the fainting fit has no serious consequences. It would seem, therefore, that because Vladimir, like Silvio from The Shot, is riveted to his mask, too eager to fashion his life on a literary model, he should be sentenced as well by an utterly inconstant fate, Pushkin's blizzard in this case, to disappear and die according to the laws of the convention that gave him birth. As I said earlier, Pushkin wrote this story on the eve of getting married, and as Murphy argues, you can sense his anxiety in this story that is basically about a man that is prevented from joining his fiancée by the forces of nature. Pushkin was stuck at his estate due to the epidemic, and while he was eager and restless to get back to Natalia, his fiancée, he was also nervous and doubtful if he is making a right decision to marry this woman. Pushkin's ironic treatment of the heroes may expose his own reservation about marriage that would permanently lock him into the fixed role of a devoted husband at the end of his own banal love plot. In the second half of the story, Maria leads a secluded life, with her now widowed mother, and despite being a young and attractive heiress of the estate, she ignores all courting of men altogether. Meanwhile, the war with Napoleon ends, and as Pushkin ironically notes, the arrival of victorious officers from the front make women more excited. Women, Russian women, were at that time beyond compare. Their usual coldness disappeared. Their enthusiasm was truly ravishing. When meeting the victors, they shouted hurrah and threw up their bonnets in the air. The bonnets line is a quote from Woe from Wit, a poem by Alexander Griboyedov, yet another poem of Pushkin's time, drawing parallels with the soldiers throwing their hats in the air. And this is the moment when a wounded officer Burmin appears in our story. So we have a new name here, Burmin. Burmin was a very attractive young man. He had just the type of intellect which women like, pliant and observant, utterly unpretentious and gaily ironical. He was simple and unconstrained in his manner towards Maria Gavrilovna, but his eyes and his whole mind closely followed everything she said or did. He seemed to be of a quiet and modest disposition, but rumor had it that he had once been a dreadful scapegrace. This did not lower him in Maria Gavrilovna's estimation, for like all young women she readily excused escapades that showed an ardent and fearless temperament. But more than anything else, more than his tenderness, his pleasant conversation, his interesting pallor, and his bandaged arm, the young hussar's retinence stirred her curiosity and imagination. Both Maria and her mother see this as a potential, and finally Maria, again, in the traditions of fictional maidens, sits in the garden with a book, waiting for a suitor to come and confess his love. And indeed, first it goes just like she expects. Burmin found Maria Gavrilovna by the pond, under a willow, in a white dress with a book in her hands, just like the heroine of the novel. After the first questions, Maria Gavrilovna deliberately ceased to keep up the conversation. Thus increased their mutual confusion, which could only be ended by a sudden and decisive explanation. And this indeed was what happened. Conscious of his embarrassment, Burmin declared that he had long been seeking an opportunity to open his heart to her, and asked for a minute's attention. Maria Gavrilovna closed the book and lowered her eyes in token of acquiescence. "I love you," said Burmin. "I love you passionately." Maria Gavrilovna blushed and bent her head still lower. "I acted heedlessly, abandoning myself to the delightful habit, the habit of seeing and hearing you every day." Maria Gavrilovna recalled Saint-Preux's first letter. A little footnote. Saint-Preux's letter refers to Jean-Jacques Rousseau's novel Julie, immensely popular among the young people of these times. This is an important detail because Maria still sees herself and this young man within the framework of this plot, and thus behaves consequently by saying, for example, "I could never be your wife." But then Burmin says something that makes the heroes break out of this bookish universe and act more naturally. "Yes, I know, I feel that you would have been mine, but I am the unhappiest creature, I am married." Maria Gavrilovna looked at him in astonishment. "I am married," Burmin continued. "I have been married for the last 4 years, and I do not know who my wife is, and where she is, and whether I shall ever see her." "What are you saying? How very strange. Go on. I'll tell you afterwards, but go on, I beg you." This is the moment when, as Bethia and Davidov note, the immature masks are dropped, and instead of two characters from a romantic novel, we see two young people, lonely, haunted by the past, and being in love with each other. And strangely enough, Burmin's story, with all its absurdity and strangeness, feels as something more real than the crazy elopement scheme in the beginning of the story. Burmin tells the story of the winter 1812. He is lost in the woods because of the snowstorm. His driver and his horses try in vain to find the road, but they find themselves in a completely unfamiliar surroundings. Finally, they see a light in the distance. Turns out it's a village church. And as they drive to the village church, some people come out of it and they start beckoning them and saying, "Come in, come in." "Mercy on us, what delayed you?" someone said to me. "The bride has fainted. The priest does not know what to do. We were on the point of going home. Come, come, be quick." Without a word, I jumped out of the sledge and went into the church, dimly lit by 2 or 3 candles. A girl was sitting on a bench in a dark corner of the church. Another was rubbing her temples. You know how it happens sometimes when you are talking, for example, to your friends or to people that you have just met, and they tell you a story about someone else. And as you listen to this story, you gradually start realizing that you know it and you know these people, even though you didn't know that these people are connected. Yes. And at the end, you have this feeling of recognition. Yes, you recognize these people, you recognize this story, and of course you will say, well, it's a small world. Yeah. This is what happens to us, the readers of this novella. With the first mention of the snowstorm, we start suspecting. With the church and the young scared bride, we know where we are, because these are the missing pieces of the puzzle. Well, let's complete it then. The old priest came up to me with a question. Am I to begin? Yes, father, begin, I answered absent-mindedly. They lifted the girl from the bench. She seemed to me rather pretty. Unaccountable, unforgivable folly. I took my place beside her above the lectern. The priest was in a hurry. The 3 men and the maidservant supported the bride and gave her all their attention. We were married. Kiss each other, said the priest. My wife turned her pale face to me. I was about to kiss her. She cried out, "It isn't he, it isn't he," and fell down senseless. The witnesses looked at me in consternation. I turned round, walked out of the church unhindered, jumped into my covered sledge, and called to the driver, "Go on!" "Good heavens!" cried Maria Gavrilovna. "And you do not know what became of your poor wife?" "I do not know," Burmin answered. "I do not know the name of the village where I was married. I do not remember from what station it was I had set off. At that time I attached so little importance to my criminal prank that after leaving the church I went to sleep and did not wake till the morning, when we had reached the 3rd station. The servant who was with me at the time died during the campaign. I haven't any hope of tracing the girl on whom I played such a cruel joke, and who is now so cruelly avenged." "Merciful heavens!" said Maria Gavrilovna, seizing his hand. "So it was you! Don't you recognize me?" Burmin turned pale and threw himself at her feet. As Bethia and Davidov note, the cognitio at the end is more a self-discovery than the discovery of someone else, and the dropping of immature masks is accompanied by some pain and guilt. So it would seem in conclusion that the God of this cosmos neither rewards nor punishes without justification. The transgression that these people committed eventually leads them to each other and ensures a sudden happy ending. But more importantly, it makes them behave as human beings and not as fictional characters. Maria's final move when she seized his hand is a warm and impulsive gesture that is miles apart from a fictional maiden she was pretending to be at the beginning of this conversation. I hope you have enjoyed my little analysis of Pushkin's Snowstorm. If you'd like me to talk more about any of his works, please let me know in the comments section. But for now, we're moving on to a different writer. Who will it be? You will find out soon. Please do not forget to like and subscribe and spread the word about this channel. I will see you next time. Bye bye.